everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. We're here today to talk about a graphic novel that's based on a classic science fiction novel. The science fiction novel is called The Parable of Talents, and I have the writer who is adapting the novel, the classic novel from Octavia E. Butler, to this new format. His name is Damian Duffy, and he's going to tell us all about it. Damian, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I kind of want to talk a little bit about background first, in terms of discovering, for you, Octavia E. Butler. Were you a science fiction fan growing up, that kind of thing? Because I was, and I've read a ton of science fiction. But to my shame, I had not heard of Octavia Butler, or I was not familiar with any of her work before reading this. And when I got done reading it, that bothered me. That I was like, man,
Yeah.
why have I not heard of this? It's so incredibly prescient, and maybe more relevant than ever in a scary way. How about you? How did you come to, learn about her work, or did you enjoy science fiction growing up and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed science fiction growing up. More, I mean, especially comics, I suppose. So it
Right.
was a lot of Marvel and then a little DC and then more independent stuff. And then it was just all too expensive. But yeah, I came upon Butler in undergrad. I was a creative writing major. And a professor like recommended Kindred to me because I wrote a story that was like first person perspective, and that one is a really like brilliant use of first person perspective, I think was why. But yeah, so just like um, since reading that, yeah, I've just been obsessed as well. But I had that same feeling of like, why didn't I know about her before this? And you're definitely not the first person to tell me that either. That I was a huge science fiction fan, but I never knew about her. So yeah, if nothing else, it's an honor to be able to introduce her to more people.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's not like she's the first person that came up with this concept of Afro-Futurism. There are so many things in science fiction that kind of lend themselves. We talk about Africa and the peoples that are indigenous to that continent, very much a tribal culture, which there are concepts and things about tribal culture which kind of lend themselves to science fiction in a lot of ways. And I think for a lot of people, they may not even have been familiar with the concept of Afrofuturism until Black Panther, right? Like that was one of the things, the film that really kind of shot it more into the mainstream consciousness of pop culture. But as you know, Black Panther as a character has been around for decades over in the pages of Marvel Comics. So I feel like now's the perfect time to be adapting Butler's work into the medium of comics. So can you talk a little bit about how the project came about and how you got involved? Because this is the second, right? There's a previous one, Parable of the Sowers.
Yes.
If you haven't read that Damien and his creative partner, who handles the illustration, John Jennings, have done. And now this is the second volume. But I do want to make clear, everybody, that I didn't get a chance to read Parable of the Sowers before. I read Parable of the Talents, and I plan on going back and reading Parable of the Sowers now, but you don't need it. You don't need to have read that. You can pick this up and read it and get a full, complete experience like I did without going back. Probably even a richer experience if you do. But anyway, Damien, go ahead and let us know how you got involved in the project.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad to hear you say that. Just by the way, also, because I feel that same way. Like she did a really great job of writing, two books that go together but also exist on their own,
Yep.
like really comfortably. So John and I first started working on adapting Octavia Butler's work with Kindred, which came out 2017, I think. No, that's definitely right. 2017. And that did well. Um, we it was 2017 and there was like a new president in office and there seemed to be, as you said, like very prescient parallels even then to these two stories. So because Kindred had done well enough that they asked us what we wanted to do next, it just seemed like this was an essential story to get out there to a bigger audience. Which it was cool to see the Parable of the Sower, the original novel, The first time it was on the New York Times bestseller list was during the 2020 pandemic lockdown. Um, which is it's all very surreal to see the different sort of bits and pieces of her story coming to life in
Right.
real time. Um, but yeah. So that was how we got to working on the parables, and we sort of came upon Kindred. We tried to adapt it before for a different publisher, and it didn't work out. And just sort of by luck, we happened to meet Sheila Keenan, who was at the time senior editor at Abrams. She was already negotiating the rights to adapt Kindred, and it just kind of went from there.
Fantastic. Well, again, everybody, the book that specifically that we're here to talk about today, Parable of the Talents, and I'm going to let Damian give a little bit of an elevator pitch. But before we do that, I do want to mention, as he said, coming out from Abrams Books, and it's going to be available everywhere, comic shops and bookstores and what have you, starting on April 22nd. Obviously, Kindred, as he mentioned before, as well as Parable of the Sowers, are already available. So if your local comic shop doesn't have them, they can order them. If you're at the bookstore, Barnes& and Noble, what have you, they're in print. You can order them there if they don't have them on the shelf. Damien, go ahead and give us kind of an elevator pitch, which I know is kind of hard because so many layers and complications, and it's a complicated story and an emotional story. But how would you describe Parable of the Talents to somebody who's picking this up for the first time?
Oh boy. So Parable of the Talents, the thing it gets the most press about is the world it exists in, which is a dystopian United States of the 2020s and 2030s, kind of uh, ravaged by climate change, income inequality. Um, in this book, pseudo-fascist president rising to power under the slogan "Make America Great Again." These are all things that people sort of know about the world that it's in, but all that world is really for the journey of Lauren Oya Olumina, protagonist from the first book. This is her adult years as a community leader and religious leader, uh, and her religion is called Earthseed, which preaches that God is change, and an alternative religion in this sort of encroaching fascist U.S. dystopia turns out to be some trouble. Um, so yeah, I guess that would be my elevator pitch, except also to say it's about mothers and daughters because there are two main narrators, Lauren, but also her daughter speaking from the future when she's grown up, which adds an extra layer of family drama and just, yeah, drama.
Yeah, yeah, drama for sure. Because again, I mentioned this idea of layers and what have you, and science fiction always lends itself to very fertile ground to tell dramatic stories. But on top of the kind of prescient way, which is again really amazing what Octavia Butler was kind of able to foresee, um, is this idea of leaning into the family drama, leaning into um, what the what the characters see as their future, what matters to them. The idea of family is big, both in terms of Osmina and her daughter, and kind of the parallels, as you said, it's kind of narrated by the daughter from the future, flashing back, but that community that Osmina was the leader of, and how much it's about kind of found family. So these are, I think, universal and relatable themes. So when you went to adapt it, because obviously, we're talking about going from prose to sequential art, you can't fit everything in, right? There's a limited space, there's limited real estate. So how did you guys tackle that challenge of saying, okay, man, this is a rich world that she's built, it's a rich story, what do we focus on? What do we want to show in the visuals? Because again, you just can't, don't have room for everything, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it like overall, it's a real big challenge to adapt Octavia Butler's novels. I will say that this particular novel was probably the easiest technically to adapt of the three, just because we had the experience of the two before
Right,
that.
right.
And because it's a duology, we could like sort of play off things like the color scheme of the first book. First book is Southern California. There's fire. It's a very red kind of book. Parable of the Talents, a fair amount of it is Northern California. There's a lot of rain happening, so kind of, just like those types of things we could play with. But overall, like the thing, there were a couple things that really helped me, and it took me at least a book and a half to really figure this out. But one was the comics writer Alan Moore uh, made up this rule that you could only have 240 words per page.
Mm.
And he didn't really. It was from Mort Weisinger, who's like the dictatorial Superman editor from like Silver Age, um, for the Comics Inside Baseball. But anyway, like I was like, okay, I need a like a structure. You know what I mean? I need some boundaries to fill and push against. So yeah, just having that word count in mind made it a lot easier to make sure I was leaving space on the page for John to draw. Because, pictures, good to have in comics.
Yeah.
Um, but like with Kindred, that was probably the thing I had the most difficulty with. But since then, I think I've gotten a better sense just of, well, one thing I realized is you have to read each book like 14 times to do it right. Minimum 14. Because a lot of the process of adaptation and getting sort of the spirit of the story into the new medium is not just understanding the text, but like the subtext, and sort of, you have to go through it a lot of times because Octavia Butler's not a writer who sort of, you don't see the seams, if you know what I mean. Like,
Mhm.
she does a very good job of, this doesn't seem like a person plotted this. This is like, this is the real story of the
Right.
person I'm reading. So it takes a while to kind of unpack that. But once you do that, you can sort of figure out what's very important to the story and what's more just kind of amplifying the world, in ways that the images can already do.
Yeah, it goes back to me talking about it being kind of a complicated story, and I don't mean it's hard to read. It's actually quite compelling,
Oh, thank you.
and again relatable in such a scary way, because this novel originally was written in 1998.
Mhm.
Long before rise of this kind of political climate we're in now, where it almost seems like we're reverting to more fascism, and the Christian right and Christian zealotry and all that stuff is a little more pronounced than it's been in my entire lifetime. So I'm
Yeah,
reading this book and we see these just bad people. These just there's no other way to put it. They're the villains of the story. And their justifications for doing these horrible things and what have you, and the what they're espousing sounds all too familiar. And you start thinking, God, that could we go down this path, and how scary that would be to see something like this happen in my lifetime. And then you juxtapose that against kind of the hopeful future of Osmina's. I guess it's a religion. I'll call it a belief system. That's probably a better way to put it, because it's not about
yeah,
worship. It's about what you believe and sharing those beliefs with others to take that next step forward for society and for humanity, kind of as a species. Which I find there's a nobility to what she believes, and it's such a sharp contrast between what she believes and what she teaches, as opposed to what the antagonists in the story are teaching, because it's all a matter of choice, right? Like you mentioned, God is change, and that's one of their fundamental beliefs. Um, and I like that idea, because we as humans need to change. We need to continue to learn and grow, and that means we're changing. But it like the starkest contrast comes in forcing someone to believe and giving somebody a choice to believe. You
yeah,
present your belief system and say, "Hey, you can believe this or not," or you can take the other darker path and say, "Hey, I'm right, you're wrong, closed-minded, believe what I believe, or we're going to persecute you in horrible ways." So, when you first read this, and then all these years later coming to adapt it, talk a little bit about wanting to put that in again as kind of subtext, because at first glance it's got to be entertaining, right? They have to want to read it, so you always have that as kind of the top layer. Hey, I got to make this entertaining, we got to make it fun to read and cool to look at. But it's important to get those themes across.
yeah. I mean, so a lot of the, making it entertaining or at least engaging read, I feel like the novel's already done, right? to an extent that it's maybe a little easier than like if we were making up the story ourselves, just because that's already been like figured out. The best way to both deliver the ideas and deliver the entertainment value, or just yeah, just the enjoyment of the reading experience. So it was just making sure to maintain those, which is, in some ways a little easier than having to invent stories that deal with these topics. But yeah, so when I first read Parable of the Sower quite a while ago. It was right after my son was born, so like 2008-ish, something like that. Um, and I only read like part of it because it scared me too much.
Yeah,
I was
right.
like, whoa, this seems too real. And that was like 2008, 2009. But to be perfectly honest, I hadn't finished reading Parable of the Talents when we pitched doing the two books as adaptations. My thinking being, surely it can't get darker than it does in Parable of the Sower.
Right.
That was incorrect,
Yeah.
and I'm ashamed to admit that. Yeah, Octavia Butler can get darker when she needs to. But yeah, I think uh, so. Part of the thing I really always want to stress about the whole prescience and Make America Great Again and stuff, it's really just she was paying attention to the politics of the day, right? Of the 90s and really back into the 80s. Because Make America Great Again came from, it was a Ronald Reagan slogan initially. And she was writing this stuff and kind of like that move from, oh, the first George Bush and like neo-conservatism into Bill Clinton and neoliberalism, which honestly was not that far, like a lot of the same sort of policy ideas and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think a lot of that also is really what influenced the work and why it seems so prescient, because she was a genius at research as well as writing, and you can see these things coming, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, as you said, like so Earthseed as Olamina's belief system, which is for her, it's not. She presents it as a religion because she knows that's what other people need to believe in something. But for her, it's just sort of a rational progression of ideas that she's uncovered, which is when it's God has changed, it's not like an anthropomorphized change. It's just recognizing the force of change writ large as something akin to God because it's huge, it's unstoppable, and you have limited control over it, if any, right? Um, and I think it's grounded in this rationality in such a way that it becomes useful. And even there are people who use these ideas now for like social organizing. Adrienne, oh God, I'm gonna forget her name. I feel like an idiot. Adrienne Marie Brown. There you go. She has this book called Emergent Strategy that takes lessons from Earthseed and uses them for like real life community organizing and stuff like that. And I feel like I've gone pretty far off topic of your question, but I think I covered some of it, right? That was pretty
No,
good.
no, that was good because it kind of leans into the next thing that that I wanted to mention, which was going back to this idea of Afro-Futurism and
Yeah,
where we can go in the future, and realizing that we're all really one tribe because we're one species and we're all much more alike than we are different. Especially if we start talking about the real science of genetics and what have you.
yeah,
Um, and so this idea that where we've gotten right now and the divisiveness, it frustrates me, and to look at it in terms of like science fiction, like how do we get to these type of stories? You mentioned her being Octavia Butler being really good at research. It's like, well, a lot of times what science fiction does is it takes the now and you extrapolate things out to their extreme, and you tell the story of the future. Well, how crazy is it that those extremes are now much less extreme because time has gone on, and what this story does, Parallels of Towns, is it extrapolates it even further. And you think at one point, if you go back to 1998 and read this story, well, we could never get there. Well, we're on that path, so that's where the fear comes in that we actually could get there, and that's
yeah.
that's a little scary.
And I
Um,
mean, she drew a lot of that just from researching like 1930s Germany,
right?
which I know is not a reassuring statement at all, but just an
No,
explanation of where
yeah.
some of those ideas come from.
But
Uh,
when we talk about tribalism, though, and this idea of community, which is certainly again a theme in the book and very much a theme of Afro-Futurism. Um, the community around these books, right? Because I know that you that there was an event. Octavia Butler, for those who don't know, she grew up in Pasadena, California. That's where she was born. There's a magnet school there named after her. And I know there was an event last week for the launch of this book and what have you. So I don't know if you had a chance to go. And this obviously hasn't come out yet for kind of the general release. But you can talk a little bit about the previous releases of the two books, and as far as kind of advanced reader feedback on this. Just talk a little bit about the community and what the response has been, because again, these are novels and critically acclaimed novels, and you're adapting into a new medium, which hopefully means they're reaching a new audience. So, what has that experience been like of becoming a part of this community? Octavia Butler has many fans. So what has that been like, kind of becoming a part of that community and presenting her work in this new medium?
I mean, it's such. See, I want to say it's an honor and a privilege, which sounds super cliche, but
Right.
for real, it is. And especially, it's really gratifying that the work is of a high enough caliber that people are comfortable, comparing the two. Um, and I don't know. I feel incredibly lucky to be able to engage with that community as much as I have. Unfortunately, I did not make it to the magnet school event. But the time, like anytime I've engaged with Octavia Butler fans, comics fans, or just people who are new to either one, everyone's been very enthusiastic, and I think really since, especially for like the hardcore fans, really sense that we're not just doing this, as a way to like dumb down her work or whatever
Right.
stereotypes,
Yeah.
sometimes those stereotypes of like classic comics from back in the day and stuff come up. Um, but that is it's very much an act like of love for her work. And we take it very seriously that we're part of her legacy. And when we first started the first book, I definitely like you think something like you think what it's going to be like to do something, and then it's entirely different when you start. Um, but I definitely never foresaw just how uh, welcoming people have been to the books and how excited they've been to talk about them with us at various events. And yeah, just the opportunity to be a cultural ambassador of Octavia E. Butler's legacy was never something that I had on my bingo card prior to starting this. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before. Like, I can't believe I hadn't heard of her or her work, because it's very worthwhile, everybody, to go and explore the things that she's written. Beyond the uncanny ability that she had to sort of predict the future. They're just
Yes.
good stories, and they're relatable in so many ways. Everybody's going to engage with them differently because we're all individuals. And so, as you've talked to these fans of whether they're fans of comics and have come into it that way, or fans of Butler and have come into it that way, do you find that people kind of have different touch points? The things that they mention about the work, like, this is kind of what it meant to me, or because not everybody's going to see it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of my interactions I'm realizing are like when they've just bought the book, like after we gave a talk or something. So, um, but times that people have talked to me a little more in depth about, what they thought after reading it, it does vary. Like you can sort of tell which community that reader is more used to, whether
Right.
they're talking about, comparing John's art to a comics artist or something, versus someone who's just like very engaged on the ideas of the story because that's new to them. So yeah, it's really hard to generalize, I guess, but like every single person I've talked to, if nothing else, seems has the same sort of sense of discovery or like inspiration, like you're talking about now. Like, I can't believe I didn't know about this,
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's something to that really speaks to how powerful and important the stories are. And Butler's ideas were in that it doesn't, it's not like just something you take in, but it's something that inspires you to either seek out more, to learn more. I mean, people took her fictional religion and like use it to do stuff in the real world, you know? Like, it just speaks to sort of the impact of her legacy overall, that it just continues on in this way well after her passing.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear she was just a brilliant, brilliant woman. Again, critically acclaimed. Success didn't come overnight for her, which is often the case with prose writers. But she's a fascinating individual. I read up quite a bit about her after. First science fiction writer to win the MacArthur Genius Grant, which is absolutely amazing and everything. So, again, everybody, I really highly recommend this Parable of the Talents. As I said before, you don't need to have read any of Butler's work or the previous adaptions that Damian and John have done. You can pick this up when it's out this week, April 22nd.
April 22nd. Yep.
And just enjoy it for what it is. And if you enjoy it as much as I did, then you're going to want to go back and read the previous things, which I will seek out as well. But yeah, I definitely encourage everybody to look up Octavia Butler and explore her work. As far as you, Damian, as we're winding down here, do you want to let people know where the best place to follow your work is? Because obviously this isn't the only thing you've done. You have other projects and what have you. So where's the best place?
You can just go to my website. It's my name, DamianDuffy.net. Some Irish photographer guy, .com, I think now. Whatever. It's .net. That's what it is. And then I have some social media, but I'm not huge on it. Kind of since writing these books, I've sort of backed away from social media, just for the parallels we've been talking about. So yeah, DamianDuffy.net. That's a good place. I got a contact email in there, and I got a list of my work, and updating with upcoming work soon.
Sounds great. I'll put a link, everybody, in the show notes to Damian's website, so you're having trouble, you can just go there. So as we're winding down here, Damian, anything else you want to share with our audience? Any other thoughts?
Oh, I did a shout out, Rosarium Publishing's Adventures of Lion Man book. I have a short story in this book. It was just crowdfunded kind of at the last minute. Like it hit the goal at the last minute. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure when that comes out, but go to Rosarium's website, check that out. A lot of great stuff. A lot from John Jennings, the illustrator of Parable of Talents, and also David Brame, the layout artist for Parable of Talents. So
Fantastic.
check that too.
Well, again, everybody, I highly recommend Parable of the Talents. A very enjoyable read, a little scary, and it's prescient, as we said, but very much worth your time, especially if you're a fan of science fiction or you have any interest in Afro-Futurism, which is kind of again, something that's been around for a while, concept that's been around for a long time, but is kind of gaining more traction. And so and again, these are important things, I think, just as a kind of a global tribe, as the species society, to bring us closer together, and we could all use a little more unity. So again, Parable of the Talents, definitely worth your time. Damian, again, thanks so much for taking the time to join me, and best of luck with the book. I hope it sells really well.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And to everybody out there in the audience, whether you're checking us out on YouTube or the audio-only feed, we really appreciate you taking the time. And we'll talk to you on the next one.